It's 7 o'clock in New York, time for NBC to bring you its regular Sunday roundup of news. Tonight you ought to hear from Athens, Greece, Ankara, Turkey, London, Berlin, Rome, and Vichy. First to the Balkans. Go ahead, Athens.
Hello, NBC. This is Peter Tompkins, speaking from Athens, Greece. Not only in Africa, but in Albania, too, the Italians are still being badly beaten. For 3 whole weeks now, General Cavaliero's forces in Albania have been counterattacking Greek positions. These Italian counterattacks have been the bloodiest of the whole war, but their only effect seems to have been to weaken the Italian position. The Italians have been throwing more and more men into the battle every day, and where are they now? They've made no gains, and they've lost an incredible number of men. If anything, they are worse off now than they were before. The biggest of these attacks was the one launched by the Italians the night before last in the central sector north of Klissura. Time after time, Italian forces attacked the Greek line. Each time they were picked out by the Greek artillery and butchered, even before they got underway. Then, as they advanced, they were caught between the crossfire of Greek machine guns and rapid-fire rifles. The Italians wavered and retreated, followed by the Greek artillery unit, which tore them to pieces. Behind them, the Italians left many dead and wounded. Each time they gained nothing. Often they lost ground. Then, in order to stem the steady advance of the Greeks, Cavaliero resorted to a new tactic. Heavy rains have swollen the rivers south of Berat, flooding the more or less level ground. Still, more Italian forces were brought up, backed by mechanized units, tanks, and armored cars. The night before last, by cover of night, with only the light of the half moon, the Italians launched a terrific attack. The Greek outposts soon noticed that something was up. At first, they thought it was merely Italian reconnaissance patrols. The Greek cavalry, charging through the semi-darkness, discovered that they were running into, but what they were running into was more like a division than a patrol of Italians. Greek soldiers all around jumped up from their tents and ready-made shelters. In no time at all, they were pouring machine gun bullets into the Italians. I don't know if you've ever seen a night battle, but to me, it is one of the most amazing sights of warfare. A whole hill would suddenly be lit up by the flashes of machine guns and the explosion of hand grenades. There are moments when the fighting is at close quarters, when you don't know which side is which. All you can see is a succession of 4th of July flashes. When one side eventually retreats, the flashes begin to diminish. When it is all over, the dead and the wounded lie where they fell in the darkness. The rain pours down on them. It isn't until dawn breaks that you can really figure out what's happened. In this case, when dawn broke, the Italians had been pushed back in disorder. The battlefield was covered with dead. According to the latest estimate, the Italians suffered more than 1,500 casualties. And so once again, the Italians have been badly beaten in Albania, as well as in Africa and along their own coast. The Greeks in Albania continue their slow, relentless advance in spite of all adverse conditions. There seems to be nothing which can stop the Greeks at present, and nothing the Italians can do about it. But meanwhile, here in Athens, an otherwise dull Sunday was livened up by a couple of alarms today. Correspondents were on the roof during the press alarm, which came at about lunchtime. But we neither saw nor heard anything. Italian bombers apparently attempted unsuccessfully to bomb Corinth. About dinner time this evening, there was another alarm. I was in GHQ at the time. I wandered about the air raid shelter and watched the ministers and high-ranking staff officers go about their business as if nothing were happening. Then I went up on the roof to see if anything was happening. I saw the king's car outside, and presumed he too was busy at his work in the special air raid shelter they have set aside for him. Up on the roof, the moon kept coming in and out of the clouds. But again I saw and heard A single thing. Absolutely nothing. We now return you to the NBC in New York.
Another report from the Balkans comes to us from our reporter in Turkey. Go ahead, Ankara.
Hello, NBC. This is Martin Agronsky calling from Ankara, Turkey. Once more, the nerve war, the war of rumor and counter-rumor is in full swing in the Balkans. This time it's Bulgaria. Reports are pouring into Istanbul that the Germans are moving troops openly into Bulgaria, and though there is no information here in the Turkish capital that this is correct, there is completely authentic confirmation of the news of German soldiers in civilian clothes that famous Nazi tourists are increasing in number in Bulgaria every day. 2 weeks ago, I reported to you that the Nazi tourists in Bulgaria already numbered 6,000 men. Today, their number is estimated at over 10,000. The system of radio telephone posts in Bulgaria along the Bulgarian-Romanian frontier, which I also told you then had been started, is reported now to be completely finished. The Bulgarian airports, which I told you then were being directed by German specialists, are now practically under 100% Nazi control, with expert ground staffs and airplane mechanics who were recruited in the past few days from among the Nazi tourists, who surprisingly showed up all ready to work. In Romania, the steady infiltration of German troops has continued without let-up. Reliable information places the number of German divisions in Romania now at 20. That is over 300,000 troops. The engineering divisions encamped along the Danube near the Romanian frontier have been reinforced. The pontoon bridging equipment, which I told you 2 weeks ago had been in depots in their camps, is now displayed for all the world to see along the Danube's banks. Certainly the stage is set for a German movement at any moment that Hitler wants to push the button in Berlin. Still, this isn't a new rumor, and it's a good idea to remember that the Nazis are past masters at the art of waging a nerve war, that manufactured crises are the ammunition with which Hitler has achieved political conquests, time without number in the past. Nazi agents have been at work underground in Bulgaria for months now, striving to create internal dissension that will weaken the power of the government. They prey on the revisionist dreams of the Bulgars, promising them the outlet to the Aegean through Greece, which has been one of the basic Bulgar demands since the Treaty of Neuilly at the end of the last war, and foster the personal ambitions of the men who oppose King Boris, and dangle visions of absolute power before their noses, if they will persuade Boris to give in to the Nazi demands. So far, the Nazis have not succeeded in finding a Bulgarian Saisankart, but they are for assistant people, and they will never cease in their search. Meanwhile, the Nazis also work on King Boris. You don't need to fight with us, they tell him. Only allow us free passage of our troops, and you will have everything you want. And while holding out with one hand the sugar of territorial increases, of gains without fighting or suffering, in the other hand they show the Bulgarian king the bitter pill he will be forced to swallow if he resists the Nazi demands. The 300,000 German shock troops who sit in Romania across the Bulgarian border, ready to use force if sweet reason fails to prevail. At the same time, the British put their side of the picture to the king. Expect no pity from us if you give in to Germany, they tell Boris. As often as possible, Britain's minister reminds the king of his conversation with Colonel Donovan, warns him not to forget Donovan's words, that America would do everything in her power to ensure a British victory, that in the post-war period the Bulgars cannot expect any help from America, either if they take Germany's side in this war. And the British, too, produce a threat of force, for it is almost common knowledge now that the British minister to Bulgaria has warned King Boris that England will be forced to bomb Bulgaria if German troops move into her territory. What Bulgaria will do may decide the future of this part of the world. King Boris knows that if Bulgaria resists, he will have the armies of Turkey and probably the armies of Yugoslavia fighting at his side. But also he must know that Bulgaria may be overrun by the Nazi troops before the force of those armies has a chance to make itself felt. Bulgaria's dilemma is not an enviable one. She lies along the road to the Greek seaport of Salonika, which it seems more and more certain is the real Nazi goal in the Balkans. The British successes in Africa faced the Germans with the first real threat of a British offensive on the continent of Europe since this war began. The German High Command realizes, as well as the British, that Salonika today offers the only possible base for a British continental army. If the Germans give the British much more time, England's mastery of the Mediterranean may make it possible for the quick transport of a British expeditionary force to Greece. It seems impossible that Hitler does not see this, and equally with his troops so advantageously disposed and so ready to move, it seems certain that again it will be Hitler who strikes first. In this country, at least, it's the opinion Bulgaria will not fight. The best that's expected of the Bulgars is a sort of moral resistance that Denmark provided. What Turkey will do if the Bulgars allow the Germans to occupy their country is again difficult to say. Bulgaria is certainly within the sphere of vital interest that Turkey has sworn so often to protect. Yet, it will be the Turkish army rather than the Turkish politicians who will make Turkey's decision this time. All I am allowed to tell you what the army thinks is that today they reverse the usual maxim and make their motto, the best offense is a defense. And here are two significant last-minute bulletins I was able to confirm late tonight. Bulletin 1. The British legation in Bucharest has moved all its records to Istanbul and is expected to end its Romanian representation and evacuate the legation staff within the next 10 days. Bulletin 2. British correspondents in Bulgaria are evacuating their families to Turkey before the end of the week. The British legation in Bucharest is prepared to leave at a moment's notice. This is Martin Agronsky returning you now to the National Broadcasting Company.
That was Ankara, Turkey. Now we stop at the British Isles to bring you the news in England. Go ahead, London.
This is John McVane in London. London has had one short raid alarm tonight. Heavy gunfire and the sound of plane engines were heard in one district, but there are no reports of any bombs having been dropped. Planes have been reported near Liverpool and over East Anglia and the southwest coast. Some German planes were over the east and southeast coasts of England during the day and the east coast of Scotland, but no bombs were reported. 2 German bombers were shot down, one by 3 British fighters and one that came too near a convoy by anti-aircraft fire from an escort vessel. A couple of Spitfires machine-gunned a ship and gun emplacements in the Calais area during a patrol flight. Mr. Churchill's broadcast today is generally recognized in Britain as one of the greatest in his career, certainly one of the greatest in this war. It was a rough, tough, fighting speech, and it inspired the millions of Britons who heard it with the feeling that the longer this war continues, the rougher and tougher they're going to treat their Axis opponents. The fall of Benghazi and the bombardment of Genoa had made most of the British certain that Italy isn't going to stand up for long under the pressure of British attacks. The British felt this afternoon that the tide of war is swinging in their direction. After Mr. Churchill's speech, broadcast at 9 p.m. here, they felt that victory in the end is certain, even though spring may bring an invasion attempt that will mean some hard pounding for the people of this island. The Daily Express will say in its editorial tomorrow that after Churchill's speech, the British, quote, see certain victory in the simple resolve to conquer or die of 4 million Britons under arms. That's one of the most interesting points in the speech to observers in Europe was the Prime Minister's statements about Bulgaria and the Balkans. In effect, Mr. Churchill warned the nations like Yugoslavia and Bulgaria that they must act quickly to save themselves if they want British help and any hope of a reconstituted nation after the Allied victory is won. Informed observers here believe that in spite of the German infiltration, Bulgaria could still do a lot to check Nazi progress in that part of Europe. It is pointed out that with isolation impossible, Bulgaria really has had to choose between throwing in her lot with one of 3 nations, Germany, Russia, or Turkey. The chief force in Bulgaria working for the Germans seems to be certain high army officers who have great awe and respect for the German army. The British would probably prefer that the Bulgarians ask aid from Turkey and work with her in defense of their territory. But if the Bulgarians were to call in the Russians to help them against the German drive, there would probably be no loud complaints from the British. As the Germans move into Bulgaria, they are isolating Yugoslavia, with its army of somewhere between 1 and 2 millions, of what one high British military authority has called the best fighting men in Europe. If the Yugoslavs are to save themselves from being conquered without ever striking a blow, it seems to the British that they must act quickly, link themselves with their neighbors, the Greeks, the Bulgarians, and the Turks, and act and set up a combination that could undoubtedly give the German High Command a problem to think about. With the Yugoslavs in the war, the Italians would have to evacuate Albania quickly to save their troops from destruction, and Italy's collapse might keep the Germans so busy they'd have to delay their Balkan plans. An official Admiralty statement issued today gives details of the naval bombardment in which British warships hurled more than 300 tons of shells into the Italian port of Genoa. The heavy units taking part were the battlecruiser Renown, the battleship Malaya, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, the ship the Germans claimed to have sunk early in the war, and the cruiser Sheffield. The Ansaldo electric works and boiler works were hit, and the port's main power station was badly damaged and set afire. Dry docks, warehouses, and harbor works were taunted by many shells, and fires broke out. Supply ships, oil tanks, and railroad yards were repeatedly battered. Navy planes cooperating with the warships dropped several tons of bombs and many firebombs on one of the largest oil plants in Italy, the ANIC at Leghorn. Other planes bombed the aerodrome and railroad station at Pisa. This is John McVane in London, returning you to the National Broadcasting Company in New York.
This is NBC's regular Sunday roundup of news. Thus far, we've visited NBC reporters in Athens, Greece, Ankara, Turkey, and in London. Now it's time for the news in the Reich. Such news as the census will permit our reporter on the scene there to broadcast. Go ahead, Berlin.
Hello, NBC. This is Charles Ronius in Berlin. After a week of false rumors and vague reports, two new facts have emerged from the French governmental tangle. The first, if reports here in Berlin are accurate, is that Admiral Darwin may be the new French premier at Vichy. The second is that Pierre Laval, whose friendliness to the Germans was expected to give him a considerable lift toward power in France, is still out. And the latest story from Vichy is that the new cabinet may be formed around Admiral Darwin tomorrow. The French admiral, who, among other things, was reported to have flown to Africa with Marshal Petain, to have resigned from the Navy, and to have acted merely as a go-between before Vichy and the Paris groups, was a dark horse. But it's considered practically certain here that he will now take over the leadership of the Vichy government. Marshal Petain, I understand, will continue as the nominal head of the French people, but his powers will be curtailed to allow Admiral Darwin to swing the big stick. Darwin, unlike Laval, has never shown any pro-German tendencies. But on the other hand, he is said to be anti-English. So, in the view of the refusal of Laval to accept another cabinet post under Petain, the selection of Darwin as a man to run the beleaguered Vichy affair would seem to be a compromise. But if my sources here are correct, his selection for the post is by no means a final solution for France. Another French military man who may have a place in the new cabinet is General Hunsinger, who first came into the eyes of the world as one of the signers of the armistice with Germany and Italy. Just what his role in the new setup will be isn't clear, but well-informed German sources say he'll be in the line tomorrow when the portfolios are passed out. This afternoon, he and Marshal Petain attended a memorial service in Vichy for members of the military academy of Saint-Cyr who were killed in action. Later, the old marshal took a long walk alone in the Vichy Park. The German radio tonight branded the reports of rioting and disorder in Vichy as untrue. All is quiet in Vichy, according to the Germans. An odd reflection to the topsy-turvy French mix-up appears tonight in the German newspaper Lokalanzeiger. The German writer claims that the famous Reims Cathedral really isn't French style at all, but is actually German style. He bases this claim on the assertion that the cathedral was built by the Franks, who were really Germans. Now, somewhere in Berlin tonight, a 28-year-old bearded Englishman is sitting alone in a cell in the shadow of death. He is Percy William DeWitt, aviator, painter, and adventurer, who was given the death penalty this week in a special court for espionage. He was accused of being a paid spy whose special task was to secure German military information for the French Second Bureau. The fact that no red posters, which must go up within 3 hours after an execution for treason or espionage, have appeared on German walls, indicates that he is still alive. His only chance of escaping the axe, or in this case, since the charge was spying instead of treason, it may be the firing squad, lies with Vice Marshal Hermann Goering. Hitler, you know, entrusted the power of granting pardons to Goering after the war began. However, DeWitt's chances look slim. No one in Germany has been pardoned for espionage or treason since war started. The Germans claim that the condemned man is a relative of the once famous Boer, General DeWitt, and that his father is a British naval officer. His trial was held in secret, but it's said he heard his sentence calmly, bowed to the presiding judge, and thanked him for a fair deal. A woman who was arrested with him in Germany is reported to have committed suicide in prison while the affair was being investigated. If the sentence is carried out, DeWitt will be the first foreigner to be executed here for espionage. Germany's air war against England seems to go on without a let-up. Tonight it's reported that German long-range bombers attacked a British convoy in the Atlantic off the west coast of Spain about noon today. 9 merchant ships were attacked in Convoy, and the Germans claim a perfect score. 3 of the ships were sunk outright by direct hits. 3 others were left helpless in flames, and the remaining 3 were all heavily damaged. One of the ships the Germans claimed to have sent to the bottom was of about 5,000 tons. The other 2 were smaller. According to this report, one of the ships left blazing was judged to be a 6,000-tonner. The big German bombers, modeled on the lines of American flying fortresses, are said to have dived low and used their machine cannons on the ships. Earlier, it was reported that a British plane which attacked the German minesweeper flotilla off the Norwegian coast was hit by anti-aircraft fire from the boat. This is Charles Lanius in Berlin. I now return you to NBC in New York.
Now to one of our reporters in the Mediterranean for news from Germany's Axis partner. Go ahead, Rome.
Hello, NBC. This is David Anderson speaking from Rome. Very few people in Rome heard Churchill's speech from London tonight. Radio reception was very poor at that time. The Prime Minister's speech didn't start before 10 o'clock here, and so it's impossible to give any Italian reaction. Official Italy never reacts until a full text of any speech is available. That will probably not arrive until sometime tomorrow morning. With the fall of Benghazi, a number of questions have been raised in newspaper circles here in Rome. Primary among these, perhaps, is what are the intentions of the British forces under General Wavell? Are they going to try to round the coast of Cyrenaica into Tripolitania, or are they merely going to strengthen their newly acquired positions? About a week ago, well-informed circles in Rome were of the opinion that the British would remain at Benghazi if they succeeded in taking this stronghold. It was felt that any advance into Tripolitania would spread out the forces of General Wavell too much, and the risks of defeat from a combined Axis force would be too great. The Italians all along have been claiming that the British were working themselves into a very vulnerable position. The British supply problem will, they say, be one of the hardest to meet. To run supplies from Egypt along the Cyrenaica coast is no easy job, and the Mediterranean always remains as a potent threat to British shipping. The reports here in Rome today speak of continued action south of Benghazi. Whether this means that the British are going to attempt to take the whole of Cyrenaica or continue their drive toward Tripoli is more than can be said here tonight. The Italians are still pointing out that Giribub stands as an Italian oasis in the desert. The fall of Benghazi has prompted several reactions in the Italian radio. Rome Radio today has been pointing out that the Italians are taking everything the British have to offer. They say it took the combined efforts of the British Navy, Army, and Air Force to accomplish their present successes. This statement is in keeping with their perennial claim that the Italians are now fighting this war. They point out that the only real military action is now taking place in North Africa, Albania, and in the Mediterranean between British and Italian forces. But, Rome Radio says, we are proud of the part allotted to us. There is no confirmation available in Rome tonight of the British claim to the capture of General Bergonzoli. Some of you will recall that his capture was assumed after the fall of Bardia. But according to current reports, he escaped in a boat to Benghazi. Neither is there any further news of the purported meeting between the two Axis dictators and representatives of the Spanish government. The Italian Riviera is currently mentioned as the possible meeting place. But, as all meetings involving the two Axis heads, there will be no announcements made until after the meeting. The passage of the Lease and Lend Bill by the House of Representatives was given anything but a warm reception here in Rome. On the other hand, ex-Governor Landon's speech before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was taken as a sign of distinct opposition to the passage of the bill. This morning, the last Requiem Mass was recited for the late Pontiff, Pius XI. Cardinal Schuster, the Archbishop of Milan, officiated at the solemn Mass, held near the tomb of the late Pope in the grotto of St. Peter's. The effective role of propaganda in a war has never been denied, and the Italians are taking full advantage of this. At present, they are presenting radio broadcasts in 23 different languages. Primary among these is the English, and over 2 hours a day are devoted to English news broadcasts and news commentators. This is David Anderson returning you now to NBC in New York.
That was Rome. Now to our reporter in unoccupied France. Go ahead, Vichy.
Hello, NBC. This is Paul Archinard in D.C. As is the case yesterday, and has been the case ever since July, when foreign correspondents took interest in D.C., things are calm and normal as usual. Nothing more sensational than a chimney fire and the collapse of a stone balcony has occurred in the past 24 hours. But that balcony accident might have caused an accident, had anyone been under or on it. But not even that happened in a town where, according to foreign rumors, rioting and trouble is supposed to be going on. This morning, Marshal Pétain attended service at Saint-Louis Church in homage to French cadets of the Saint-Cyr Military Academy who lost their life in this and the last war. In the afternoon, Madame la Maréchale attended a benefit concert in D.C., Casino Theater, which was packed by a decisively calm and at times almost lethargic audience. The Marshal himself did not go to the concert. On this first spring-like Sunday, he preferred a short drive in the country sunshine. But the United States Ambassador, Admiral Lay, went to the concert with Mrs. Lay. As people streamed out in a steady flow afterward, two big cars only waited at the entrance. One belonged to Madame la Maréchale, the other to Admiral Lay. Both cars, by the way, were of well-known American make. The only important event of the day was expected, but hardly for today. Foreign Affairs Minister Flandin's letter to the Marshal relinquishing his post was officially released. At the same time, the Marshal's letter accepting Mr. Flandin's resignation was also announced. Everyone here expected Flandin's departure, but well-informed circles opined that it would come together with the resignation of the entire cabinet prior to a general reshuffle. As matters now stand, Admiral Darlan, as was intimated before, becomes Foreign Affairs Minister. He keeps his place as Minister of the Navy and becomes Vice Premier. This is the first time in 12 months that one man holds three important cabinet posts at one and the same time. Mr. Edouard Daladier a year ago, and until the Norway crisis in March, was Premier, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of the National Defense. Consequently, Admiral Darlan's importance in the government is perhaps even greater than was Vice Premier Pierre Laval. Of course, no official decree yet designates Darlan as heir apparent or successor to the Marshal, as was the case for Laval. But this discrepancy may still be made up for, however, through some special decree from the Marshal. Concerning the lease and loan bill just voted by the House in Washington, considerable interest has been aroused over here. Commentators point out that in spite of a strong opposition, the House did not limit presidential power, since the amendments do not touch on the essential basis of the project. The vote passed on the Dirksen motion is regarded here as the result of a surprise vote, which only the absence of a large number of voters rendered possible. The discussions, writes one paper, has revealed the firm determination of the United States government to pass a project to which it closely links the safety of the American continent, unquote. The future will show to what degree, and in one matter, the position taken by the United States will influence a European war, writes another commentator. But France must and cannot do otherwise than observe in silence. And he concludes, nevertheless, France has a right to feel towards the United States the gratitude due for the aid to her population, unquote. And other papers announced the expected arrival of the Red Cross ship Cold Harbor with 1,000 tons of condensed milk, medicine for the hospitals, 2 tons of vitamins, and 25 tons of children's clothing. Well, there's been a lot of talk about camps recently, a refugee camp for the insecure foreigners in France. And speaking of camps, we learned that all French boys reaching the age of 20 will pass 8 months in youth camps. Only the physically inept will be exempted, with 2 to 5 years imprisonment and 1,000 francs fines for slackers or those who aid them. This little detail reminds me of a number of professional football players in Marseille and thereabouts who found a way of being exempted from military service during the war. Well, a ruling was passed recently by official football tycoons to the effect that if these men were physically inapt to serve their country in times of need, they are equally inapt today to exert physical and remunerated occupations. Consequently, and henceforth, are they barred from playing professional football. This is Paul Archinard in D.C., returning you to New York.
This has been NBC's regular Sunday evening news roundup, reporting tonight from Athens, Greece, Ankara, Turkey, London, Berlin, Rome, and Vichy in unoccupied France. This is the National.
Be sure with Pure. The Pure Oil Company presents H.V. Kaltenborn, Everybody knows electric refrigerators need to be defrosted now and then for efficient, economical operation. But maybe you didn't know your car needs defrosting too. It's time right now to get winter-weary lubricants out of your car and get it back in shape for summer driving. The way to do it, the safe, sure, economical way, is Pure Oil's complete bumper-to-bumper changeover service. You get the 7 vital services your car needs for summer. Pure Oil's famous solvanized tune-up, a change to fresh summer-grade Tioline motor oil, fresh lubricants for transmission, differential, chassis, front wheel bearings, and complete radiator service. And that's not all. Pure Oil dealers are now making an unusual offer with bumper-to-bumper changeover service, a bargain bonus for giving your car the services it needs. You'll hear about it later in the program. Listen for the details. And now, H.V. Kaltenborn.
Good evening, everybody. The Convoy issue is dominant in Washington tonight. The President discussed it with his War Cabinet, and there are several indications of early action. It is a safe guess that the President will not make any flat announcement that he has decided upon convoys. That would be undiplomatic and would unnecessarily challenge antagonism. Too many people remember that the President once said, "Convoys mean shooting, and shooting means war." The statement may not be wholly correct. There has been a lot of shooting in recent years without any formal declaration of war, and there has been a good deal of convoying that did not result in shooting. I inquired at the Navy Department in Washington the other day on just what happened when we convoyed during the World War. We were in that war for a year and a half and convoyed 2 million men and all their supplies across the Atlantic. Throughout that entire operation, we did not lose a single regular warship while engaged in convoy duty. One Coast Guard vessel was torpedoed while acting as escort to a convoy. One converted yacht was torpedoed when it left its assigned position as flank guard of a convoy. This means that throughout the World War period, when we convoyed an enormous expeditionary force and a constantly increasing mass of supplies across the entire Atlantic, not one of the destroyers or other regular warships engaged in convoy duty was sunk while acting as escorts to convoys. The President's statement that convoys mean shooting and shooting means war should be read in the light of that experience. Recent dispatches from London indicate that Britain may lose the Battle of the Atlantic unless we can find some way to cooperate in getting war materials at least part way across the Atlantic. Various American correspondents writing and speaking from London during the past week have expressed far more concern over submarine sinkings than over anything that has happened in Greece. There is general agreement among American military experts that events in the Mediterranean area are still a sideshow. They are unanimous in emphasizing that Great Britain's greatest danger of defeat lies in the Atlantic. For the first time, there is emphasis in Washington on the loss of cargoes as well as on the loss of ships. In London, the United States Embassy revealed this morning that it had lost trucks, office supplies, and diplomatic pouches as the result of a recent sinking in the Atlantic. In Washington, reports circulated in congressional circles this afternoon that 40% of American aid to Britain is now being sunk in the North Atlantic by German submarines, raiders, and aircraft. Britain has had to give up weekly announcements of the tonnage sunk for fear of the effect it was having on British morale. The decision by the United States to cooperate in getting war material to Britain would probably not involve our escorting British ships all the way across the Atlantic. In all probability, it would first involve nothing more than a development of the Western Hemisphere Neutrality Patrol. The United States has warned belligerents to keep out of the waters of the Western Hemisphere. We can make that warning effective by the use of the United States Navy. We could, for example, patrol the route from American ports to Halifax, Nova Scotia, so effectively with patrol bombers and warships that submarines and surface raiders would have little chance of going undetected. We could do the same thing on the route between American ports and Greenland, which is clearly in our declared neutrality zone. We could do the same between American ports and Iceland, which many geographers consider as also belonging in the Western Hemisphere. If we did no more than that, we would lighten enormously the burden of the British Navy. Our own Navy has worked out detailed plans to do all these things. It stands ready to go to work tomorrow. It remains for the President to give the word. Several prominent members of the administration are becoming impatient over the President's failure to act. They are saying privately what Representative Luther Patrick, Democrat of Alabama, said on the floor of the House this afternoon, pointing out that the United States has voted $7 billion for war aid to the democracies. He added, "Shall we see that go for naught and be strewn all over the bottom of the ocean? Davy Jones' locker is no place for the sweat and blood and bone of the American people." The President himself told his press conference the other day that American ships are entitled to protection against attack in all oceans of the world. He has just opened the Red Sea to American ships. Italy and Germany have indicated they will sink American ships that try to ply the Red Sea. In the face of this threat, it seems unlikely that the President can permit American ships to enter the Red Sea without providing them with suitable protection. Mayor LaGuardia of New York is chairman of the joint Canadian-United States Defense Board. In that capacity, he is supposed to know something about the defense plans of this administration. He told the Canadians in Ottawa the other day that Canada and the United States intend to defend the safety of their ships not only in coastal waters, but in all Atlantic waters extending 1,000 miles out from the western seaboard of Canada and the United States. Now, a man in that important, responsible official position can't make that kind of statement in Canada unless it is true. We can get an idea of what this means when we remember that it is only 1,600 miles from Newfoundland to Ireland. White House Secretary Early indicated this morning that Mayor LaGuardia was only repeating what has been said before. He emphasized that he was talking about neutrality patrols and not about convoys. This is the best evidence that the White House is shying away from the use of the word convoys. But if you will ask a Navy man to explain to you the difference between a convoy and a neutrality patrol, he will probably tell you that a well-conducted neutrality patrol is the most effective form of convoy. But since the President hasn't associated neutrality patrols with shooting and war in the public mind, he will probably do nothing about convoys and something about an effective neutrality patrol whenever he thinks the time for action is ripe. It must be perfectly obvious to any thinking person that if we propose to keep German warships out of our side of the Atlantic by an effective neutrality patrol, we must be prepared to take the risks that this involves. So far, we have pretended that the neutrality patrol does not involve risks. But the only reason there has been no risk is because Hitler has decided to keep his surface raiders and submarines on the other side of the Atlantic. He will send them to our side of the Atlantic whenever that suits his pleasure. During the World War, German submarines sank a lot of ships off the New England coast. President Roosevelt was advised today that the nation now has only a 2-week supply of soft coal and that defense production already faces serious impairment. Various defense plants have had to slow down operations because of a lack of coal. In the event a swift settlement is not obtained by the mediation board to which the coal strike was referred yesterday, the President may be compelled to proclaim a national emergency and force resumption of production. He has the power to order the mines reopened. The Treasury today asked Congress to raise federal taxes to provide $3.6 billion in new revenue. More important, the Treasury suggested that non-defense expenditures be pared by about $1 billion a year. Assistant Secretary of the Treasury John L. Sullivan proposed drastic surtaxes on lower and middle-income brackets and a general increase in most other levies. Secretary of the Treasury Morgenthau told the Ways and Means Committee that the American people are ready and willing to pay the small price of the multi-billion tax program in return for security against aggression. He asserts that $1 billion can be whittled from non-defense expenditures without sacrificing the relief or Social Security programs. Specifically, he suggested the CCC and NYA programs ought to be re-examined and that the Economy Acts might be used on farm aid items. He pointed out that Congress provided $450 million for farm parity payments, although the budget called for only $212 million. London reports tonight that Germany has obtained permission from Spain to pass several Nazi divisions across that country for an attack upon Gibraltar. The news is not official. Germany is also said to have obtained permission to move troops to Spanish Morocco for a coordinated attempt to close the Western Mediterranean. There is nothing improbable about these reports. Hitler's victories in the Balkans and North Africa have had an enormous effect in Spain. Logically, an attack through Spain is Hitler's next step. It is less difficult than an immediate attack on Turkey, and if successful, would give the Axis control of part of the Western Mediterranean. It explains Hitler's increasing pressure for cooperation from unoccupied fronts. His troops and supplies must pass through the Vichy government's domain en route to Spain. British and Greek forces are still entrenched in positions at Thermopylae Pass, awaiting a new German offensive. The Germans must still blast a path for a sweep down upon Athens, 80 miles farther south. The lull in the land fighting today indicates that the Germans are bringing up new forces for the final drive. The entire Athens area is being subjected to bombardment by waves of German planes. Ships carrying refugees to the Greek islands are being bombed and machine-gunned. The British and Greek rearguard forces are weary and outnumbered, but are ready to make a last stand at Thermopylae. Whether they can be evacuated before being overwhelmed is doubtful. German bombings have destroyed a good deal of the shipping that was available in Greek ports. There will be an effort to carry the remnants of the Greek and British forces to the island of Crete, 200 miles south of Athens. The regular Greek broadcast, directed to North America from Athens tonight at 6 p.m., was perhaps the last to be issued from free Athens. As caught by NBC's shortwave service, it was something of an epitaph to the hard-fighting, courageous armies of modern Greece. In the main, it consisted of the reading of quotations from the foreign press, extolling the courage and fighting spirit of the Greek soldier. American, Turkish, British, Swiss newspapers were quoted in tribute to the Greeks. Then, at the end of the broadcast, the announcer reiterated his hopes for the ultimate survival of the spirit of free Greece. Listeners here in New York caught a feeling of despair in the voice of the speaker from Athens. It sounded as though he had given up all hope. But the Greek announcer was right when he told us that the spirit of Greece could not and would not die. Good night.
Good morning, everyone. At this time each weekday morning, the National Broadcasting Company joins its networks to bring you the news at home and abroad. The war news on this, the 544th day of conflict, is reported by our staffs in England and Germany. Later, Earl Godwin gives you the news in Washington. But first, reports from overseas. Go ahead, London.
This is John McVane in London. Single German raiders last night made scattered attacks on various parts of Britain. London had 2 raid alarms, but only a few districts reported bombs. The hardest raid of the night was made in a northeast coast town, where hundreds of incendiary bombs and many high explosives were dropped. Today's communique mentions other raids on points near the east coast. Damage and casualties are said to have been slight. British bombers again hammered the invasion ports of Calais and Boulogne last night. watchers on the English coast could see the flashes of anti-aircraft fire as the German guns hunted for the British planes. Bad weather stopped any other British attacks on the continent. Before dawn today, the German long-range guns in France began firing at the Dover area. British guns answered. A mist hung over the channel today, and visibility was cut down to about 2 miles. Authoritative circles in London today branded as untrue the Japanese claim that Britain had turned down proposals by Japan regarding the Pacific and the Far East. It was pointed out here that neither Britain nor Japan made any proposals, and that the conversations merely consisted of an exchange of views. In these conversations, Britain, without making any direct or implied threat, pointed out the consequences that would arise if Japan were to make any intervention toward the south. Both in the talks with the Japanese ambassador in London and those between the British ambassadors, Sir Robert Craigie and Mr. Matsuoka in Tokyo, the British say they have taken every step to draw attention to what those consequences might be. To put it in plain and undiplomatic language, the British are carrying no chip on their shoulders, but they told the Japanese that if they try to jump on the Dutch East Indies or French Indochina, they can expect plenty of trouble in a hurry. Informed quarters in London take an optimistic view of the statement by Monsieur Sarıcıoğlu, the Turkish foreign minister, that Turkey will go to war if necessary to stand by her pacts. The statement is regarded in London as a valuable reaffirmation of Turkey's resolve to carry out her treaty obligations. It is noted here that at the time the Turkish-Bulgarian pact was announced, attention was called to the clause stressing Turkey's loyalty to her agreements and readiness to abide by her commitments to Britain. British official circles have never doubted that Turkey would abide by her agreements, and they hope the other Balkan countries will study Turkey's stand. There is great interest in London as to what the reaction of the other Balkan governments will be. There is no news of the start of the German entry into Bulgaria, and it's still believed in Britain that it's just a question of waiting, as a British spokesman put it, until the Germans press the button. Reports from Washington that the British and American governments are planning a new series of military and diplomatic moves that will bring them into closer collaboration are not confirmed here. Official circles point out that the relations between the two countries have been clearly stated in speeches by President Roosevelt, Mr. Churchill, and Mr. Hull, and there seems to be no reason to add anything to the collaboration between the two countries as they have stated it. With the invasion of Bulgaria expected hourly in London, the position of Russia in the Balkan tangle still remains obscure. Soviet sources here are non-committal, and it may very well be that Stalin is keeping his decisions to himself. There is little doubt that Russia would prefer not to see the Germans in Bulgaria. On the other hand, Soviet diplomats are emphatic about Russia's desire to keep out of the war. And reading between the lines, it seems fairly certain that Russia won't actively oppose a German entry into Bulgaria. The fact that Germany has troops massed all along the frontier with Russia, a gesture that Russia has reciprocated, is a good indication that neither country trusts the other very much. But the Soviets haven't any special reason to trust Britain either. The semi-official Russian denial that the Turco-Bulgarian pact was made with her knowledge and approval is probably another indication that Russia wants to emphasize that whatever happens in the Balkans is none of her affair. But whether Russia can afford to keep up an attitude of isolation is another thing. As Germany moves eastward, she comes more and more into conflict with interests that every Russian government, whether Tsarist or communist, has regarded as vital. If Germany ends up by attacking Turkey, she will threaten Russia's entrance into the Mediterranean. And it's difficult to see the Russians staying isolationist under such conditions, unless they are more in awe of the German army than there is any reason to believe at the moment. However, for the present, Russia may be expected to avoid open conflict with Germany and to continue to play her diplomatic cards for all they're worth, to get her share of whatever spoils there may be. This is John McBain in London, returning you to the National Broadcasting Company in New York.
And that's the news from England this morning. And now overseas again, over the British Isles, the English Channel, Britain's eastern frontier, and the Nazi-occupied Low Countries, for a report from our staff in Germany. Go ahead, Berlin.
Hello, NBC. This is Theodore Knaut speaking from Berlin. Adolf Hitler is going to speak this afternoon at 5 o'clock Berlin summertime. It has just been announced. The occasion for the address is the anniversary of the founding of the National Socialist Party in 1920, February 24th having been the day on which his party program was announced. The program to which Hitler has adhered for 21 years and on the basis of which he has gone so far. Following as it does the speech which Mussolini made in Rome yesterday, it will be interesting to see what the other Axis chief will have to say to his people and to the world, and whether any further light will be thrown on the future plans of the two Allied powers and their third partner, Japan. There are so many points at which they can begin to strike. In the Balkans, in the Mediterranean, on England itself, and in the Far East. And so many ways in which, in combination, they can launch their blows to end the war. And we have been waiting for so long for the great offensive to start that here, as surely is the case everywhere else too, people's nerves are somewhat stretched. And the war on nerves is not to be overlooked in considering the moves that have recently been made on the chessboard of the war. Yesterday, both the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung and the Frankfurter Zeitung devoted a large part of the front pages of their Sunday editions to accounts of the Japanese Navy, comparing it particularly with that of the United States. The new Japanese battleships of 45,000 tons each, about which there has been so much mystery, are now supposed to be ready, and in their armament and defensive armor are said to be superior to anything that America has afloat. And besides, the Japanese are supposed to have the advantage of being able to concentrate their fleets, while both the navies of the United States and of Great Britain are bound to be more or less scattered, which offsets the numerical advantage they have over the Japanese. Someday, and I dare say soon, we will be able to connect up such incidents as the simultaneous publication of such articles in leading papers, and yesterday's Mussolini speech, and today's speech by Adolf Hitler, and the recent agreement between Bulgaria and Turkey, and the surprising forecast of Germany's plans for ending the war that appeared in a German news agency last week, and fit them into the picture of setting the stage for the great war drives that are expected to start soon. And we will know what their effect was on the war of nerves in heartening the spirits of the Axis peoples and depressing those of the British. But at the moment, we are still waiting for the show to begin. And to say that we are all agog is to put it mildly. Speaking of the Bulgarian agreement with Turkey, the Russian official news agency TASS denies a report coming from Switzerland that Russia took part in the negotiations there. And regarding Japan, it is said in official quarters that the mediation in the dispute between Siam and French Indochina is continuing. The armistice that ended last Friday, we hear from newspaper reports, has been extended until tomorrow. The visit of Ambassador Oshima to Fushel to call on Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop there is taken here as a sign of the especially hearty friendship between the two nations and between the two men personally. As for the Balkans, nothing is known here of demonstrations in Bulgaria, for which there is said to be no occasion. And a possible visit by Mr. Eden to Sofia and Belgrade is discounted. The technical difficulties in the way of such a trip are said to be considerable. The German communique reports some submarine sinkings. One U-boat is credited with 4 ships, aggregating 33,000 tons, and another with 2 for a total of 7,000 tons. Otherwise, there is no military news of importance today. A British raid on Wilhelmshaven is made little of, as most of the bombs dropped in the mud flats, it is said, and the large fire that the British report is said to have been in a farmhouse, which, it is true, was destroyed. This is Theodore Knox speaking from Berlin and returning you to NBC.
Next, Earl Godwin with the early morning reports from our newsroom in Washington.
And good morning, folks. Our long-suffering and rather generous State Department has been doing its best to help Russian diplomacy maintain what the diplomats call a balanced foreign policy. That is, Russia does not want, it says it does not want, to show partiality to any one country in its treaties and so forth, at least in the externals. And so they were very glad to get from our State Department the concession of lifting that moral embargo on airplanes from here to Russia, that occurred about a month ago, and it was, of course, merely a gesture because there are no airplanes for Russia, and no airplanes to spare for anybody except Great Britain. But the score was chalked up diplomatically as one for Russia, and the career boys were happy. However, the Dies Committee on Capitol Hill emitted a roar of displeasure and went to work to show that come what may, and no matter what the promises have been, Russia, as the Dies Committee claims, is still by and large a purchasing agent for Berlin. The Dies Committee made so much of a fuss about it that the matter reached as far as the British Parliament, where there was a debate, and the new British ambassador, as one of his very first errands, took up the matter with our own State Department, which today, I'm told, will go a step further and try to find out just what's behind the recent figures, their Department of Commerce figures, which have been used by myself and other Washington newspaper correspondents and commentators and the Dies Committee to indicate that since Germany started the war, Russia has suddenly increased her purchases of stuff that she grows and makes herself, but which Germany needs. Cotton, wheat, copper, oil well machinery are the main items. Today, if the appointment book is correct, Sumner Welles, Undersecretary of State, and the Russian ambassador, Mr. Omansky, will have a heart-to-heart talk, and it is assumed here, believed at least, that this matter of American goods leaking through Russia to Germany, if that's true, will be discussed. There's no doubt about the figures in the Department of Commerce indicating that there has been a tremendous bulge in certain American exports to Russia since the German advance on the democracies started. This government has no idea of aiding Germany that way, but Undersecretary of State Welles indicates he has to have this allegation proved to him, that he must know for sure that America is playing the game for Germany via Russia before anything can be done about it. And what can be done about it is that we simply stop exporting certain shipments by the license method. The inquiry into the facts on strikes in defense industry continues today before the Judiciary Committee of the House, headed by the veteran Hatton Sumners of Texas as chairman. That committee may adopt a policy of meeting so frequently and for so long a time for a month to come that strikes in defense industry may die away simply because of adverse publicity. You know, that hearing draws a large crowd every time the committee meets. But the biggest show in Washington is the debate on the Lease Lend Bill, which has a distinction now of putting on longer speeches than almost any debate in years. We are told that when Senator Burt Wheeler of Montana starts to speak, he will consume 2 Senate days on his attack on the lease lend measure. However, that bill can be passed by the Senate this week if they hurry up, but the question is, how much will the Senate change the measure? The opponents say they have enough votes to force incorporation of an amendment which would prevent American troops from being sent abroad. The administration spokesman do not think the proposed clause will be written into the bill. And Earl Godwin says goodbye. That's the news from Washington at this time.
And that's the news from at home and abroad. For reports of further developments of world interest, listen to the many regular news summaries broadcast daily by this station. And this is the National Broadcasting Company.